about the same stuff that those other bills were about. And that's why I think it's relevant to discuss today. And I'm happy to yield to questions, for questions.
Will the gentleman yield?
Gentleman yields for questions.
Yes.
Thank you, Representative Anchia. I heard you several times you've said the intent of the bill is not valid. You mentioned something about there isn't fraud. I heard you several times during this discussion say, not my words, but somebody else's. And I also heard that dialogue between you and Representative Wu. But I want to remind the body of some things you said in 2011 that were specifically your words.
Oh, I've been waiting for this moment for a long time.
I bet you can't wait for this.
And
the type of voter fraud
that's been
seen most prevalently in the state of Texas is mail-in ballots. 70% of all the prosecutions by the Attorney General are mail-in ballots. And you kept going on, and then you said, you said, we will be reading about mail-in ballots fraud, mail-in ballot fraud, and mail-in ballot fraud. These are all your words. You also asked why
can I offer you some context?
You also asked why. I read about the whole context
here.
No, it's right here.
It's not a question, so I'd like to offer you some context because
I read the context, and you're validating that there is indeed fraud in Texas. And here you're trying to tell the body that there isn't, and I think that it's disingenuous, and it's really unethical.
Let me tell you what is disingenuous, sir.
That's disingenuous.
When you take a speech
it wasn't
that
a speech, it was dialogue.
14 years ago, on this very mic, and you boil it down to, I don't know, a dozen words, and you take those words to try to prove your point. Let me give you the context behind that, because I think that was intentionally misleading. One, mail-in ballot fraud, even then, was rare. And a rounding error of a rounding error. What was exempted from that speech...
You said 70% of all prosecutions the Attorney General done are mail-in ballots, and you repeated yourself in your own words 3 times.
I'd like to finish my answer, please. 70% of 1 is still 1. 70% of 10 is 7, okay? And that was over a period of time. What you need to understand about that context is the strict photo ID law, just like the law that is being offered today, was offered with no evidence of impersonation. The only evidence that we had, albeit minuscule, was in mail-in ballot. And it was minuscule.
Representative Chia, I disagree. I read the whole dialogue. I read the entire dialogue.
I'd like to answer your question.
I disagree. I'm going to go sit down and let you explain to everybody.
You can disagree, but I'd like to answer your question.
Members, let's not
you're not permitting me to answer. You're over-talking me, and you're not asking questions. So I'm going to answer your question now that you've walked off the mic, and I'm going to look right at you. And so you have to understand 4 concepts. 1, voter fraud in Texas then and now is virtually non-existent. Where there have been incidences, these rounding errors, it has been in mail-in fraud. This bill is not about photo ID, which was offered up in the videos that were selectively excerpted. And the parts that were taken out of that video, very conveniently, where you only focused on 14 words, was where I said mail-in ballot or voter fraud was virtually non-existent. Then, it's virtually non-existent now, and it is intellectually dishonest for people to try to take 14 words out of a broader speech and try to prove your point with it. That is intellectually dishonest. It may be okay for Twitter. You might get some likes, and that's okay. But when you take out the parts of the speech that say there's no material voter fraud in the state of Texas, and where I say I know that this bill is not about voter fraud in the state of Texas, and you excerpt that and only take the part that is favorable to your position out of context, I think that's unfair. So I'm really glad that Representative Tinderholt asked me about that in the form of a question. So I was able to provide that context because that was really not intellectually honest.